Sometimes the strongest move is not fighting back, not explaining, not begging people to understand you, but simply walking away in silence. In a crowded city filled with noise, arguments, and endless ego battles, there lived a young man named Daniel who always felt the need to defend himself. Whenever someone disrespected him, he argued. Whenever people misunderstood him, he explained himself endlessly. If someone left his life, he chased them emotionally trying to fix everything. Daniel believed fighting for every relationship and proving himself constantly was a sign of strength. But over time, this habit slowly destroyed his peace. Endless arguments exhausted his mind. Toxic people drained his energy. Emotional attachment made him weak. One evening, after another painful argument with someone he deeply cared about, Daniel sat alone outside a quiet train station feeling emotionally broken. His head was filled with anger, regret, and frustration. Nearby sat an old man calmly drinking tea while watching people rush through the station. After noticing Daniel's emotional state, the old man asked softly, "Why are you trying so hard to stay where your peace is disappearing?" Daniel looked confused. The old man smiled faintly before continuing. "Some doors are meant to be closed quietly, not fought over endlessly." Those words hit Daniel deeply. The old man introduced himself as Elias and explained that emotionally weak people constantly chase closure, validation, revenge, and explanations. But mentally strong people understand an important truth. Not every battle deserves their energy. The power of walking away, Elias said calmly, comes from valuing your peace more than your ego. Daniel stayed silent because for the first time, someone described exactly what his soul needed to hear. Over the following weeks, Daniel began visiting Elias regularly after work. One evening, Daniel admitted honestly, "I hate walking away because it feels like losing." Elias smiled slightly before shaking his head. "No," he replied calmly. "Begging for respect where none exists is losing." Daniel stayed quiet while Elias continued. Most people stay in toxic situations because their ego fears rejection, loneliness, or being misunderstood. Those words forced Daniel to reflect deeply on his life. He realized many of his emotional struggles came from refusing to let go. He stayed too long in unhealthy relationships. He argued with people determined to misunderstand him. He exhausted himself trying to prove his worth to people who never truly valued him. Elias then explained something powerful. Walking away in silence is not weakness. It is self-respect. Days later, Daniel faced his first real test. During an important meeting at work, a co-worker publicly mocked one of his ideas unfairly. Normally, Daniel would have argued emotionally to defend himself immediately. Anger rose inside him instinctively. But then he remembered Elias's words. Instead of reacting, Daniel calmly finished his work, gathered his things afterward, and walked away from the argument completely. The room became strangely quiet. The co-worker who expected emotional conflict suddenly looked uncomfortable because Daniel refused to participate in the chaos. Later that evening, Daniel realized something surprising. Walking away peacefully felt stronger than winning pointless arguments ever did. Because silence protected his peace while emotional reactions only fed conflict, Daniel continued learning from Elias. He slowly began understanding how much energy he had wasted trying to control other people's opinions. One afternoon, while sitting beside a river outside the city, Elias asked him quietly, "Do you know why silence scares people?" Daniel shook his head. Elias smiled faintly before replying, "Because silence removes access to your emotions." Those words stayed inside Daniel's mind deeply. Elias explained that emotionally manipulative people often survive by controlling reactions. They provoke anger, guilt, sadness, or insecurity because emotional responses give them power. But when someone walks away calmly without feeding the conflict, manipulative people suddenly lose control. Silence is powerful, Elias said softly, because it reveals who is depending on emotional chaos. Days later, Daniel experienced this truth himself. An old friend who constantly disrespected him during conversations began criticizing him again publicly in front of others. Normally, Daniel would have defended himself emotionally for hours. But this time, he simply looked at the man calmly, smiled faintly, and left the conversation without anger. The room became awkwardly silent. His friend seemed confused and irritated because Daniel refused to react emotionally. Walking home later that evening, Daniel felt something unfamiliar: freedom. For the first time, he realized peace grows when you stop giving unnecessary people access to your emotions. One rainy evening, Daniel confessed something painful to Elias. "Sometimes I stay in bad situations because I fear being alone." Elias looked thoughtfully toward the falling rain before answering softly, "Many people choose familiar pain over unfamiliar peace." Daniel stayed silent because those words described his life perfectly. Elias explained that emotionally unhealthy relationships survive because people fear loneliness more than suffering. They tolerate disrespect, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion simply because leaving feels frightening. But strength, Elias said calmly, is choosing peace even when it requires solitude. Over the following months, Daniel slowly started removing toxic influences from his life quietly. He stopped chasing people who ignored him. He stopped explaining himself endlessly to people committed to misunderstanding him. He stopped begging for effort from emotionally unavailable individuals. At first, loneliness felt uncomfortable and heavy, but eventually, something surprising happened. His mind became quieter. His stress decreased. His emotional stability returned slowly. One night, while sitting alone inside his apartment, Daniel realized something important. Being alone peacefully felt far better than constantly feeling emotionally drained around the wrong people. And in that silence, he finally understood why strong people are willing to walk away even when it hurts. Months later, Daniel faced one of the most difficult situations of his life when someone he deeply loved decided to leave him unexpectedly. The breakup shattered him emotionally. Every instinct inside him wanted to beg, explain, and fight for the relationship endlessly. He replayed memories constantly and imagined ways to change the other person's mind. One evening, overwhelmed by sadness, Daniel visited Elias and admitted quietly, "I feel like walking away means giving up on love." Elias listened silently before replying softly, "No. Walking away means accepting that love cannot survive where respect no longer exists." Daniel lowered his eyes painfully. Elias continued, "You cannot force someone to value you through desperation." Those words hurt deeply because Daniel knew they were true. For weeks afterward, he struggled internally every day. But instead of chasing endlessly, he slowly accepted reality. He allowed himself to grieve without humiliating himself emotionally. And over time, the pain began fading naturally. Looking back months later, Daniel realized something powerful. Walking away silently protected his dignity. Had he begged endlessly, he would have lost both the relationship and his self-respect. That lesson transformed him permanently. As Daniel's mindset changed, people around him slowly began noticing a difference in his energy. He no longer argued over small disrespect. He stopped trying to convince everyone to like him. During conflicts, he often remained calm and detached instead of emotionally reactive. One afternoon at work, a co-worker asked him curiously, "Why do you seem so unbothered lately?" Daniel smiled slightly before answering, "I learned not every situation deserves my attention." Those simple words carried enormous wisdom. Most people waste years emotionally attached to things that destroy their peace: arguments, fake friendships, gossip, rejection, and ego battles. But mentally strong people understand attention itself is valuable. They protect it carefully. Elias once explained this truth perfectly to Daniel. "Your energy is limited," he said calmly. "Spend it on growth, not endless emotional warfare." Over time, Daniel realized silence often speaks louder than arguments ever could. Walking away calmly from disrespect showed more confidence than defending himself emotionally for hours. Because true confidence no longer depends on winning every battle or proving every point. True confidence comes from knowing your peace matters more than temporary ego victories. Point one cold winter night. Elias invited Daniel on a long walk through empty streets covered in snow. As they walked quietly beneath glowing streetlights, Elias suddenly asked, "Do you know why most people cannot walk away peacefully?" Daniel thought carefully before answering. "Because emotions control them?" Elias nodded slowly. "Exactly. Ego creates attachment to conflict." He explained that many people stay trapped in painful situations because their pride constantly demands closure, revenge, validation, or the final word. But emotionally disciplined people understand something different. Not every wound requires confrontation. Not every betrayal deserves revenge. Sometimes peace comes only through silent distance. Elias then stopped walking and looked directly at Daniel before saying softly, "Walking away is hardest when your ego still wants to stay." Those words stayed in Daniel's mind permanently. He realized silence becomes powerful only when walking away hurts emotionally, but you choose peace anyway. That is real strength. Not escaping because you feel nothing, but leaving because you finally value your mental peace more than emotional attachment. Years later, Daniel became known as someone unusually calm during conflict. Friends often asked him how he avoided unnecessary drama so naturally. One evening during dinner, a younger man complained endlessly about disrespectful people in his life. After listening quietly, Daniel finally asked one simple question: "Why are you giving those people so much access to your mind?" The young man stayed silent. Daniel explained that emotionally weak people allow negativity to occupy their thoughts constantly. They replay arguments mentally for days. They obsess over rejection and criticism endlessly. But emotionally strong individuals know when to disconnect. "The power of walking away," Daniel said softly, "is the power of protecting your peace." He explained that walking away is not always physical distance. Sometimes it means mentally detaching from negativity, refusing to engage emotionally, and no longer feeding chaos with attention. Those words deeply affected the young man because he realized much of his suffering came not from toxic people themselves, but from his refusal to let go emotionally. One autumn afternoon, Daniel unexpectedly encountered the same co-worker who once mocked him publicly years earlier. The man approached awkwardly and admitted quietly, "I used to think your silence meant weakness." Daniel smiled faintly before replying, "Most people misunderstand calmness." The co-worker then confessed something surprising. "Watching you walk away without reacting actually made me respect you more." Hearing that reminded Daniel of one important truth Elias taught him long ago. Silence often reveals confidence more powerfully than emotional reactions ever can. Weak people constantly need to prove themselves loudly. Strong people remain calm because they no longer depend on external validation. Later that evening, while walking home beneath orange autumn skies, Daniel reflected deeply on how much his life had changed simply by learning when to walk away. His relationships improved. His mind became quieter. His emotions felt lighter. And most importantly, he stopped abandoning himself just to keep others comfortable. As Elias grew older, Daniel visited him one final time at a small cabin outside the city. surrounded by mountains and silence. Sitting beside a fire together late at night, Daniel asked softly, "Was the greatest lesson you ever learned about peace?" Elias remained silent thoughtfully for several moments before answering quietly, "Protecting your peace sometimes requires leaving people behind." The fire crackled softly while Daniel absorbed those words deeply. Elias explained that life becomes much lighter once you stop forcing connections, chasing understanding, and fighting battles that damage your spirit. "Not everyone deserves access to your energy," he said calmly, "and not every goodbye requires noise." Before Daniel left that night, Elias smiled gently and added one final truth. The strongest people are often the ones who quietly walk away from what no longer serves their soul. Years later, long after Elias was gone, those words continued guiding Daniel through every difficult season of life. In the final years of his life, Daniel often sat alone near the same river where Elias once taught him about silence, peace, and emotional strength. Looking back, he realized walking away had saved him countless times. It saved him from toxic relationships, pointless arguments, emotional exhaustion, and becoming bitter toward life itself. The world around him still remained loud and chaotic. People still chased validation, fought ego battles, and destroyed their peace trying to win arguments that changed nothing. But Daniel no longer needed to participate in that chaos. One evening, while watching the sunset reflect across the water, a young stranger sitting nearby asked him quietly, "Was the real power of walking away in silence?" Daniel smiled softly before answering, "It teaches you that peace is more valuable than proving yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you." The wind moved gently across the river as darkness slowly covered the city beyond the trees. Then Daniel added one final lesson. The moment you stop chasing people, arguments, and validation, you finally hear the peace your soul was searching for all along. After years of practicing silence and emotional discipline, Daniel noticed something unexpected. The less he chased people, the more clearly he could see their true intentions. When he stopped begging for attention, fake friendships slowly disappeared on their own. When he stopped arguing endlessly, manipulative people lost interest in controlling him. Silence exposed everything words once hid. One evening, while sitting alone in a quiet cafe, Daniel watched two old friends arguing loudly over pride and ego. Neither wanted peace. Both only wanted to feel right. Watching them reminded Daniel of his younger self, the version of him that believed every misunderstanding required emotional battle. But now he understood something different. Some arguments continue forever because neither side truly wants understanding. They only want victory. Later that night, Daniel wrote something inside his journal that stayed with him forever. Peace begins when the need to win disappears. That sentence became one of the most important truths of his life. Walking away had not made him weak. It had made him wise enough to recognize which battles slowly destroy the soul. One cold morning, Daniel received a message from someone who had deeply hurt him years earlier. The person apologized sincerely and admitted regret for how they treated him. Reading those words brought many old emotions back unexpectedly. Pain, sadness, anger, memories of loneliness. For several minutes, Daniel sat silently staring at the screen while emotions moved through his mind like storms. Years earlier, he might have reacted emotionally immediately, but now, he simply observed his feelings calmly before deciding how to respond. Eventually, he replied politely without reopening old emotional wounds. Afterward, he realized something powerful. Walking away in silence had healed him more than revenge ever could. Time and distance had given him clarity that anger never provided. One of Elias's old lessons suddenly returned to his mind. The greatest revenge is becoming peaceful enough that the past no longer controls you. Daniel smiled faintly because he finally understood those words completely now. As Daniel grew older, younger people often came to him seeking advice about heartbreak, betrayal, and emotional pain. One evening, a young woman sat across from him crying over someone who repeatedly disrespected her, but still expected access to her life. After listening quietly, Daniel asked softly, "Why are you fighting so hard to keep someone who keeps destroying your peace?" The woman stayed silent because deep inside she already knew the answer. Daniel explained that many people confuse attachment with love. They stay connected to painful situations not because they are loved properly, but because they fear loneliness emotionally. Walking away feels painful at first, Daniel said calmly, but staying where your soul suffers slowly hurts much longer. The woman wiped tears from her eyes while listening carefully. Daniel then added one final truth. Sometimes closure is not a conversation. Sometimes closure is deciding you deserve peace. Those words changed something inside her permanently because for the first time, she understood leaving quietly can be an act of self-respect. One afternoon during heavy rain, Daniel took shelter inside a small bookstore near the edge of the city. While reading quietly near the window, he overheard two men discussing how real strength meant dominating arguments and never backing down from conflict. Daniel smiled softly to himself because he once believed the same thing years ago. But life had taught him otherwise. Real strength was not loudness. It was control. Anyone could scream, threaten, or react emotionally. But remaining calm while walking away from disrespect required enormous discipline. As rain struck the glass windows beside him, Daniel reflected deeply on how silence often unsettles people more than anger ever does. Emotional reactions give others access to your inner world, but calm silence protects it. Later that evening, while walking home through wet, empty streets, Daniel realized something beautiful. Peace grows strongest in people who no longer need external approval to feel valuable. Years later, Daniel visited the old train station where he first met Elias long ago. The city had changed. People had changed, but the memory remained clear in his mind. Sitting quietly on the same bench, he watched strangers rushing through life carrying stress, anger, and emotional exhaustion on their faces. Suddenly, he noticed a young man nearby arguing loudly on the phone, desperately trying to explain himself to someone who clearly refused to understand him. Watching that scene felt like looking at his younger self again. After the call ended, the frustrated young man sat down heavily beside him. Daniel remained silent for several moments before asking gently, "Why are you exhausting yourself trying to convince someone who already decided not to listen?" The young man looked surprised by the question. Daniel smiled faintly before continuing. Peace begins when you stop forcing yourself into places where respect no longer exists. Those words stayed with the young man long after Daniel quietly walked away again. One winter evening, while sitting beside a fireplace inside his home, Daniel reflected on one of the hardest lessons he ever learned. Not everyone will understand your silence. Some people will call it weakness. Others will think you stopped caring. But emotionally mature people understand silence differently. Silence often means choosing dignity over drama. It means refusing to destroy yourself emotionally, trying to change people who refuse to change. Daniel remembered how painful it once felt walking away from people he loved deeply. At first, silence felt lonely, but eventually, that loneliness transformed into freedom. He no longer woke up anxious over toxic relationships. He no longer carried emotional exhaustion from constant conflict. The quietness he once feared became the source of his peace. And in that stillness, Daniel finally understood something important. Walking away in silence is not about giving up on others. Sometimes it is about finally choosing yourself. As Daniel entered old age, people often admired how peaceful he seemed no matter what happened around him. Friends asked how he remained so calm during betrayal, criticism, and disappointment. One evening during dinner, someone finally asked him directly, "What changed your life the most?" Daniel thought carefully before answering softly, "Learning that not every reaction deserves my energy." The room became silent immediately. Daniel explained that most emotional suffering comes from unnecessary attachment to opinions, arguments, validation, and toxic people. But once a person learns how to detach peacefully, life becomes lighter emotionally. "Silence protects your spirit," he said calmly, "because not every storm deserves your participation." Those words deeply affected everyone listening because they recognized how much energy they wasted fighting battles that never truly mattered. Late one night, while walking beneath a sky filled with stars outside the quiet city, Daniel reflected on everything Elias had taught him throughout life. He realized the true power of walking away was not escape. It was emotional freedom. Freedom from needing approval. Freedom from constant conflict. Freedom from chasing people who no longer valued him properly. The more he protected his peace, the more peaceful life itself became. Looking up at the silent night sky above him, Daniel smiled quietly because he no longer feared losing people the way he once did. He finally understood that anything forcing him to abandon his peace was never truly meant for him. And that realization removed enormous emotional weight from his soul forever. In the final stage of his life, Daniel often sat beside the river at sunset, watching the water move calmly through silence. One evening, a young stranger approached him and asked softly, "What is the greatest sign of inner strength?" Daniel remained quiet for several moments before answering gently, "The ability to walk away peacefully from anything that disturbs your soul." The young man listened carefully while golden sunlight slowly disappeared across the river. Daniel then added one final truth that carried the wisdom of his entire journey. Weak people always need the last word. Strong people choose the last piece. The wind moved softly through the trees as darkness slowly covered the water below. And sitting there in complete silence, Daniel realized that true power was never found in controlling others. It was found in finally controlling himself. As the final sunset of his life slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, Daniel sat quietly beside the river with complete peace inside his heart. He thought about every painful goodbye, every betrayal, every argument he once believed would destroy him emotionally. But time had taught him something beautiful. Nothing hurts forever when you stop holding on to it. The people who misunderstood him, the relationships that ended, the doors that closed, all of it eventually guided him toward the peace he once searched for desperately. Looking at the calm water moving silently before him, Daniel finally understood the greatest lesson of all. Walking away in silence is not weakness, pride, or revenge. It is self-respect. It is choosing inner peace over emotional chaos. It is understanding that protecting your soul matters more than winning temporary battles. As cold evening wind moved gently through the trees around him, Daniel closed his eyes and smiled softly to himself. Because after spending years trying to be accepted by everyone else, he finally learned the most important thing a person can ever learn. The moment you stop chasing what destroys your peace, life becomes quiet, light, and truly free.